In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davis. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. Today, I am going to be spending a little bit of time talking about my reflections from my recent break. So I am just back from about 10 days away in Hawaii, and I thought I really needed a break. You know, it's been a really full start to the year, which is awesome. But there were a lot of things that sort of came up for me when I was on that break in realizing the power of actually having space. And so I think that's probably what struck me the most about this break is that it really held a mirror up to what happens when we finally give ourselves enough space to notice sort of what's been sitting underneath the surface all along. And a lot of us often feel like we need rest or clarity or space, maybe some creativity or perspective. But what we often do is stay just busy enough to avoid the discomfort that comes before those things arrive. And that's what that trip really reminded me of, because when we slow down, especially if we're used to moving quickly, like many of us are, when we are being productive and solving problems and building things and working hard and filling every spare moment, it can feel extremely uncomfortable to slow down. And my experience is that it can feel a little bit like a restlessness, maybe a bit of guilt in slowing down, and sometimes even a bit of an urge to prove that the time off is still productive or still useful. So it's really interesting because not everything needs to be productive in life. And interestingly, one of my biggest reflections is that every time I truly slow down and allow myself to step out of the constant doing, something always opens up. So it might be new thoughts arriving. You know, when I had a break over Christmas this year, I developed my proprietary program. This time, when I created space, I had a number of new work requests come through from people. I don't even know how they found me, to be honest. And so time and time again, every time I create space or have a break or take a step back, new opportunities seem to present themselves. And it's not because they're forced or anything like that. It's just because I think I created space to finally allow them to come in. And that might sound a little bit woo-woo, but I truly do believe in energy. And the more that we create space, the more things come in. Sometimes we just need to be a little bit patient. When we talk about sort of slowing down and creating space, space is not necessarily empty. I always think that the space we create is where the insight really lives, and it's where we're able to gain perspective and where we're able to hear ourselves think again. Because I actually think many of the answers we're looking for are not going to come from pushing harder. They're actually coming from pausing long enough to notice things. And for a lot of high performers, I completely resonate with this. Space feels really uncomfortable because it removes the noise. And when the noise drops away, we're often left with more important questions. Questions like, am I living in a way that feels aligned to how I want to live? Am I building something that really serves me and represents who I am, whether that's a career or a business? Or am I leading in the way that reflects the kind of person I want to be? And I think that's another big reflection from this trip is being able to pause and think about, are we being the person that we want to be? Not just, am I doing the job I want or the business I want or the goals that I want to hit, but the person. So it's really easy to become reactive in life and in leadership and to respond to what's in front of us. It's very normal to respond to what other people need, to respond to the pace of our inbox, our calendar, our team, our clients, our family, our responsibilities. But before we know it, we can be operating efficiently, but not intentionally. I've been guilty of this many times in the past, and it takes a lot of work and effort to really pause and be considered about how we want to operate and to notice and course correct. Because there's something really powerful about stepping out of our normal environment and asking ourselves, who am I when the noise dies down a bit? Who am I when I am not the achievements that I am achieving? What kind of presence do I want to bring? How do I want people to feel around me? I think is a really important question to ask. That's a really important one for me. And asking yourself what really matters most to me now, because it will actually be different in many cases from 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or 12 months ago. And 12 years ago. And so I think we really often outgrow older versions of ourselves, older versions of success, but we don't often stop and reflect and think, have I outgrown that? And where do I want to put my focus moving forward? And having space actually helps that. So for me, one of the most valuable parts of my time away wasn't actually just the rest. It was the ability to reflect and to lift my head up and sort of look at a horizon view about what I'm creating and how I want to move into this next season. And it's particularly relevant for me because my Pilates studio closes in the next 4 weeks. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about how I want to show up moving forward and also how I want to allocate my energy moving forward because I'm going to have a lot more energy to focus on different areas. And I think it's really important that as people and as leaders, we actually take that time out. I like to try and do it every quarter because if you are a leader, whether in a workplace or your business or your home, people will feel the quality of your presence when you're able to step back and then step back in. And I think it's really important to think about how we want to show up regularly because it's so easy to get caught in the groundswell of life. Now, on a slightly more practical note, one of the other lessons from this trip was how good walking is for our health. Now, I talk about this a lot, but Liam and I did most days between 20,000 and 25,000 steps, and it truly is elite for our health. Now, I know it sounds really simple, and it is. I always say simple, not easy, but I was really just reminded about how important and powerful basic movement is, not necessarily punishing movement or movement squeezed in because we hate missing a workout, but just consistent, natural, low stress movement across the day. And walking more completely changed how I physically felt on this holiday. My energy was better, my head was clearer, my mood was better. I felt more regulated in my nervous system. And I also felt like I was digesting my food better because I was walking. And, in Italy, they have something called passeggiata where they actually walk after their meals to help that digestion. And I think sometimes I've been guilty of it too. We can become so obsessed with optimizing our health, doing all of the extra little hacks that we think and we know can optimize our health, that sometimes we overlook the most effective things. And I think walking is one of those. It supports our metabolic health, our stress regulation, our brain function, sleep, digestion, mood, and it does it in a way that's really sustainable and it's accessible. We can literally do it anywhere. And so sometimes we can underestimate what the body needs because there's so much noise in the wellness world. And sometimes things can feel more complex than they need to be. So I think there is something really grounding about remembering that a human body was designed to move regularly. Interestingly, I read the other day that as humans, we move 7 to 10 kilometers less per day than our counterparts in the 1970s. 7 to 10 kilometers less per day, which is wild. So I think, really important to try and just move and walk whenever we can. And that's something that I really want to bring into my life now that I'm back from holidays. I always try and bring something back, and I do walk almost every day. But it's something that I want to do is try and just really up my steps and sort of rather than thinking, oh gosh, I've got to do a big 2 hour walk, thinking, how can I slot it in at multiple points throughout the day? Another lesson that really stood out to me was around technology. And I think that tech is really helpful in many ways. And I use it for my business. I'm not anti tech at all. It helps me run my business, it helps me create and connect. And it helps all of us in hundreds or thousands of ways every day. But reducing its use to defined times is exceptionally healthy. And I do this anyway at home with the help of Opal app. But I was really reminded on this trip how easy it is for technology just to become a constant background presence in our lives, even when we're not actively using it. And so a quick check, oh, I'm just going to look at Instagram or TikTok or emails can often become 10 minutes. A response to someone becomes a scroll on Instagram. A small moment of boredom becomes an automatic reach for a screen. And I shared in last week's podcast that it takes 23 minutes anytime you have a distraction to regain your focus again. And so sometimes throughout the day, we're actually never in a state of flow. And I actually think one of the hidden costs of constant tech is that it keeps us in a low grade state of mental interruption. And it's almost like that low level of stress constantly. So having dedicated times to check your technology, I know it can feel really difficult. I actually can't do it without the help of a blocking app because those tech companies, they have the smartest behavioral psychologists working for them. They know how to interrupt our attention. And so I think it's really important to just be mindful of that. And I've actually started keeping my phone out of sight because even just seeing it prompts us to often want to pick it up. And so I think it's about having boundaries with technology, not being unrealistic or rigid because we do need it. It's part of our lives, but really about protecting our attention. Now, another very important lesson is one of the most Australian things that's most important to me is I'll never take Australian coffee for granted. Now, look, there's no deep leadership or meaningful reflection in this. It's just more that I love the ritual of a good coffee. And my goodness, how lucky are we in Australia to have exceptional coffee? Because it took me multiple coffee shops to even find something that was remotely close to Australian coffee. I actually found a little cafe that did it in an Italian style. So I was able to have a macchiato in the mornings. But it definitely made me very grateful and express gratitude every day that I was able to get a coffee that was at least half decent. So that was another little reflection of mine. And I actually think one of my favorite lessons from this break was that boredom is the key to creativity and problem solving. And I think when we were kids, I don't know about you guys, but I would say to my parents often, I'm bored. Can we do something? And my mum would always say to me, yep, then be bored. And so it enables creativity and problem solving. And now I think we're in an environment where the minute that there is a gap, we fill it. We scroll, we listen, we reply, we consume, we distract. But boredom is really important. It is often the space that allows ideas to arrive, the space our brain starts making connections between things, or just before we solve something that's been sitting in the background unresolved. And so when we remove constant stimulation, our mind has room to wander, and wandering is not wasted time. And I think that's something that, as someone who is programmed to be full and busy and always doing and going, can feel really uncomfortable. But not every problem is going to be solved by sitting at our desks and thinking harder about the problem. Often we will find that problems are solved by slowing down. Maybe we're in the shower, maybe we're sitting at the beach, maybe we're walking or staring at the ocean or doing nothing that is productive. Because when the brain is not under constant input, it can finally integrate all of the information and ideas that we have been taking in. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough in work culture. We really praise speed and responsiveness, but many of the best ideas actually require spaciousness, not responsiveness. And this is not just ideas for creativity for work. This is for our life, our business, our leadership, for how we want to show up moving forward. Boredom also helps us build our tolerance for being ourselves. And I actually think boredom and silence is the key to a really successful life, because it's interesting to observe if we cannot sit in silence without needing to feel like we need to escape it. It's really useful information. And this trip reminded me that some of the discomfort that we feel when we slow down is not a sign that we're doing something wrong. It's just a sign that our nervous system has become conditioned to stimulation, to output, and to noise. And I think that's why slowing down can be so valuable. It gives us signs and it helps us to see and hear the things that we might be missing out on. So I think one of the invitations from this episode is, don't just take time to recover and rest and move on. Maybe take some time to reflect. And some of the questions that I think are really helpful are: what feels better from taking a pause? What feels heavier than it should? What ideas come back? What do we miss? What do we not miss in our lives? What kind of person are we when we feel less rushed? Because I know I am absolutely a different person when I feel less rushed. And I have really been able to work on letting go of needing to be in control of so many things. And what might need to change so that the version of you is not reserved only for holidays? And I think that's a really big question, because how do we bring the version of us that goes on a holiday back into our daily lives? Because it's often the best version of us. And I think that last question for me is really the real opportunity. And I don't think it's that everyone has to go on an island holiday or anything like that, but just building moments of boredom and stillness into your days or your weeks. Maybe it means building white space into your week. Maybe it means walking more and less overcomplicating our health. Maybe it means having clearer boundaries with our phones. Maybe it means letting boredom into our life instead of filling every gap, or taking your own leadership seriously enough to ask who you're becoming and who you want to come. And so I think for me, this trip was really the reminder that space is productive, but in a different way, that boredom is not laziness. And that's certainly something that I used to think. And it might not always look productive from the outside, but if we take a step back, why does every moment of our life really need to be productive? I think in a world that constantly rewards visible output, there is something really powerful in trusting the quieter forms of progress as well. So those lessons from my island break: really slowing down creates space. Space creates clarity. Clarity helps you lead and live more intentionally. Movement matters. Tech boundaries matter. Boredom is incredibly powerful. And Australian coffee is really bloody good. So I think one of the most important lessons overall is that the quality of our life and leadership is shaped not only by how well we perform under pressure, but by whether we know how to step back, to reset, and to listen when life gives us a chance to listen. Thanks for listening. Speaking of listening, hopefully you've gotten something out of that. And I would love to hear if there is something that you're going to take moving forward that you can incorporate into your week. Maybe it's a bit of white space. Maybe it's a bit more walking. Feel free to pop it in the comments, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Ange Davis. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.